So I think first up today, we'll have Madam Webb. Are you ready to present, Madam Webb?
Yes, I am.
That is absolutely super. So I'll let you take your presentation, and then being democratic, we'll ask the group if they have questions going forward as opposed to keeping them till the back end. I want to make sure everybody gets their questions asked and answered, and we have a good solid debate and discussion about each presentation. So I'll turn the presentation over to you, Madam.
Professor McQuaid will be co-presenting with me, so he will start, if that's okay.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Okay, there's three authors of this. Well, in reality, there's one main author, which is Alexandra, who's been introduced before, and I'm just going to set out a little bit of the beginning of the presentation. But she's done the vast bulk of the work on this. And right, next slide. So whoever's got control. Yeah, thank you. Just as a disclosure factor, this is part of a small EU-funded project called Escalate, Coordinating Higher Education Responses to Digitalization, which was actually started before COVID-19, so we were rather lucky or unlucky in that respect. But it means we're comparing some different experiences in different EU countries, both East European, Romania, Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, and UK. Basically, to set out some context, the digitalization's high on the agenda of supranational bodies like the EU, the UN, etc., and universities across the globe are undergoing constant transformation so they can better respond to society and labour market needs. But this means that universities have had to develop and adjust additional digital strategies and digital literacies and skills among the academic staff in order to respond to the demands for more online learning and global connectivity. So much innovation, learning and teaching increasingly involves digital technologies. In fact, it was quite interesting to see one of the last papers on Cambridge where the doctors have moved from 1% to 25% online consultations with patients. That's my interpretation of it. And certainly as somebody who's actually had the experience of online consultations, in some ways it is a great improvement and saves everybody a lot of travel time, etc. Although there are differences, I think, in seeing people in person versus the video. So there's pros and cons of it. Also, COVID-19 then has forced universities and others to respond rapidly to increased digital teaching and services in a rather hurried way, and therefore we haven't actually thought through a lot of the issues. And that's what part of our project is about, is thinking through some of the issues of this very rapid move towards online. We've moved along some existing trends in online teaching, but also we've got some new trends. But there's a lot of uncertainty here. We're uncertain about which of these trends are going to be permanent, which will be discarded once we get the vaccine for COVID and get back to something verging on the normal, or which will be amended after the pandemic. Some may be systematic changes, which is really about the universities, which is the focus of our paper, universities rethinking what the meaning of education for them is. How do they organize it, both for the students and for the staff? Other issues may be the problems of datafication of education. Now, this is what Ben Williamson argues, that the process of datafication means that many functions or practices or tasks of higher education are being rendered machine readable. So they may machine readable as digital information. So that means when we give assessments to students, it can all be recorded in a machine readable form. This has got a lot of implications. So it can lead to developing algorithms, which we know the many biases of algorithms, especially they're based on a particular cohort that you're looking at. There may be developing data analytics for monitoring students, which already happens in many universities, and for monitoring staff. Maybe introducing more machine learning or even AI into assessments and teaching. And in that way, maybe university staff are currently training their technology that's going to replace them in future. So this raises issues of how the information is used, by whom as well, and other unintended consequences. These unintended consequences may be automation, surveillance, or data protection, as mentioned by Frida earlier in one of the last talks, or ethical issues. So next slide, please. So to give some context for the universities in Scotland and the UK, the Digital Economy and Society Index is a composite index published annually by the European Commission. It's been doing it since 2014, and the 2021 is recently out. And it measures the progress made by EU states towards digital economy and society, bringing together a whole set of relevant indices. And overall, it shows that UK is one of the more advanced societies in the EU in terms of digital economy. 71% of the population with at least basic digital skills compared to 57%. So while we look at the EU compared to, say, Uganda earlier on, we had excellent keynote speech on Uganda and the problems of lack of digital literacy, etc., in the population there. But still, in the EU, it's not much more than half the people actually have basic digital skills. About 46% of the population have above basic levels in the UK, compared to the EU average of less than a third. The other thing that so Europe is by no means monolithic in terms of the access to digital information, digital services, digital education, etc. Now, in terms of skills shortages predicted by the Commission over the next 5 years, in UK and elsewhere, particularly there are new jobs such as AI, cybersecurity, and e-commerce. But in addition, major shortages are projected in social and emotional intelligence skills, so maybe leadership, adaptability, continuous learning, interpersonal skills, etc. And also in cognitive skills such as higher level information processes and in interpretation and critical thinking. These are core university taught skills. These are absolutely core to what the university is doing. So we know that there are going to be major shortages, and universities have got a key role to play in that. So next and final slide for me. Now, finally, to set a number of government, the context of universities, they sit within a number of UK or national digital strategies, and also case of Scotland, and this is probably true across the globe, but in terms of Scotland, we also have a Scottish Government's digital strategy, which aspires to harness the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution to increase economic and social prosperity. We've had earlier revolutions, coal and steel, information technologies, etc., and the first industrial revolution of steam power, water power, and textiles, etc. So this is the fourth one in the last couple of 100 years, the argument goes. But these types of strategies do feed through to higher education policy. So in the case of Scotland, the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education argues that key policy-based initiatives and programs influencing digitalization in higher education institutions are aligned with the vision for Scotland as a productive, innovative, and digital nation with education and skilled workforce able to successfully engage in the world of work in a globalized modern economy. So we can see what the higher education institutions, universities are actually operating very much within a context. But it is quite interesting that that context is probably quite unsurprisingly in terms of the government's focus on employment, economic development, etc. But the role of education as an educated policy, including issues of arts, etc., are maybe downplayed if we fit the university strategy within these wider, more economically based strategies. So that's another issue that we may unintendedly be moving towards a certain direction which we haven't clearly all thought through. So now I want to pass over to Alex, the main author, to discuss some of the initial changes in practice in response to COVID-19 in universities in Scotland. It's very early days yet, but there's much to come. So I'll pass over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Ron. So before, I think that the presentation just disappeared. So I'll just load it quickly again. Apologies for that. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we
okay.
can definitely see.
Lovely, thank you. So I'll just carry on in that context of Scottish idea for embedding digitalization. Obviously, a lot of things have been already happening even before COVID happened. So there has been many examples of proactive developments by higher education institutions in addressing that digitalization need. Obviously, not all institutions will have the same resources and the strategic vision for how to fund or how to organize and deliver those national digital aspirations. And even just the fact that we've already discovered today and talked briefly about the whole idea of understanding of digital education and digital university. Over the years, a lot of terms came up, a great variety of terms indeed. And just the slide mentions just a few, like digital university, digital literacies, virtual learning, e-learning, manual earlier on also referred to the hybrid versus blended learning. All those concepts and names appear in the domain, and there is important distinction perhaps that once some users and some institutions use it interchangeably, they do suggest a difference in a degree to which technology is already used, or a level of integration of those digital practices with the more sort of traditional methods of learning and teaching. What's important is to emphasize the different shifts that happened recently that perhaps stimulated the interest in digital learning and e-learning and the need for it. And very important one is the changing way in students want to learn, and thus digitalization is perceived as an opportunity to enhance student participation and engagement and change this more traditional model of delivery that a lot of critics consider as perhaps more static in delivery, and taking it to the new way of learning, more flexible, more dynamic, where the agency of students is taken into consideration. Of course, as Ron already emphasized, the other important shift is the whole idea of preparing students for work, and the agenda of employability and embedding skills, including digital skills, into curriculum is definitely one of the factors that is playing in driving the move towards online, blended, or whichever term we're going to use. And then very important as well is to look at the higher education institutions as a working businesses, institutions that need to be competitive. They need to create operational advantage, and digital learning offer that potential scalable measures to introduce more cost-effective and time-effective learning initiatives. And especially this is important in the context of increased number of students. And that's an argument for a lot of institutions to be tapping into this trend. In recent years, universities around the world, also Scottish universities, have heavily invested in development of digital structures, such as virtual learning environments that enable an application of different measures, such as podcasts and forums and wikis and blogs and various discussions forums. And also the whole system enables students to actually be assessed in that online environment as well. And that's very important, to be able to create an infrastructure whereby it's not only a delivery, but also students are able to be assessed through the submissions, e-submissions, e-portfolios, and as such. We also have examples of those massive courses, MOOCs, massive open online courses, where the wholly online learning experience happened before COVID. And while the emphasis was, especially pre-pandemic, on that opportunities of bringing learners, connecting them, enabling them to collaborate away from the university campus, so tapping into those opportunities of what technology can actually do to us in terms of connecting us. Yet a lot of critics encouraged to reflect about that path dependencies for future and how those choices, including implementation of those massive learning initiatives, how do they set a certain paradigm for delivery and maybe an expectation for solutions for learners and teachers in the future. So lots of things were already happening before the pandemic, and very important is also to make a distinction that universities were trying to respond in a multifolded way. So obviously, in order to increase that provision of digital skills, a lot of happened in that realm of delivering specific programs of skills that are needed and desired by employers out there. So a range of different proposition of courses that address digital skills such as ICT, artificial intelligence, all the data science, cybersecurity and computing, all those skills or programs featuring those skills were or are already on offer in many universities. This is also very important in this moment to emphasize that those courses would be addressing what we call the specific digital skill gap, meaning the skills that are sector or role distinguishing specific. So they are needed in a specific domain. So for example, for designers, there would be ability to also use things like Adobe Photoshop. For engineers working in manufacturing context, things like computer-aided designs, and many different formats of customer relationships management software, or computer programming and networking in IT. So those would be very specific skills that are desired by the employers out there. But that's not the only thing. Universities also recognize that there are a wider idea of what we understand as the digital skills, something that we could call much softer skills of being able to actually use a basic ability to maneuver in the online space, be able to operate, like for students, within that virtual learning environment, being able to tap and access to resources such as library and all those different productivity softwares and tools that are now available to both staff and students. That sort of a data literacy is much wider than just the distinguished skills, digital skills, specific digital skills. And of course, the other side of that development is definitely placed with the focus on the staff to be able to use and offer and deliver learning within those VLEs platforms. They have to have skills and abilities to do that. So a lot of effort in terms of promoting and delivering online and blended learning was key even before the pandemic. Now, the other important aspect here is that the digital skills are also much more widely now embedded within whole curriculum. And this is quite a new and refreshing way in responding to digital gaps of offering students to actually train and upskill and develop their skills in a kind of problem-solving mode. And is important as much as what they do and how they utilize access to data, how they're able to handle and analyze data. The important part as well in turning the assessment into more innovative and a digital literacy oriented task is how students are then present or communicate that knowledge. Very much it is about emphasizing delivery or communication of gained knowledge in that new format, which is the format of digital artifacts. So we're talking here, asking students about doing presentation or video or podcast or a digital essay, rather a traditional format of delivery. And all of that sort of captures that need and increases understanding of what we mean by digital skills. So those very specific subject-oriented skills, the idea of a workforces today and tomorrow being able to operate flexibly and with appropriate level of skills in terms of how they communicate, how they hold conversation in the digital format, how they conduct interviews or are being interviewed by potential employers. So all of that aspects are very, very important. All of that, of course, comes and is very much demonstrated in absolute necessity for university now to invest in those systems that enable to create that knowledge and exchange. So various different universities will have a very different operating systems. It could be Panopto, could be something else, but those are absolutely mandatory infrastructure elements now to deliver all what I've been just talking about. And the last aspect is about emphasizing importance of students' learning experience. So recognizing how much investment needs to be done in terms of that infrastructure, but also access to physical equipment for students and staff indeed, but also the need for communicating with students in the formats that are much more appropriate for them, something that they feel like they're following and understanding more. So snappy, short information using blogs and using social media and apps is something that now is being embedded into that idea of digital university. So all of this has been happening, at least to extent, before the COVID, but we all know, and so many lovely speakers already today presented how much of shock for the higher education, and not only was COVID-19 and a pandemic, and really highlighted the importance of digital delivery, and in a sense highlighted the perhaps lack of preparedness for many institutions. Others got out of the crisis or coming out of the crisis or still within this transition period in a better position. And in all of this, it's very important to highlight what's been done well. So we have an example of a local Scottish higher education institution with some of the practices that enabled staff and students alike to actually undergo this transition in the best way potentially possible. And those practices seem to make a good effort and impact it positively. And the first practice is something called a scheme called Digital Champions. And of course the universities that provided a lot of training in a timely manners for staff were the ones who noted the difference. So the idea here is not only to provide training in the usage of VLEs or how to actually use the tools, but the idea that also came up earlier during today, being able to actually translate the ideas or pedagogy behind a concept and courses into this completely new way of delivering. And digital champions were members of faculty, members of the schools who were there feeling a bit maybe more confident in terms of their usage and understanding of technology. And they were able to help to translate that traditional face-to-face delivery into the new model of VLE and actually enthuse colleagues to focus on those design principles and the student-focused delivery. So they were also kind of a vessel for many institutions and for our local institution too, in terms of communicating what's needed, as they were kind of a vessel in between of a team of faculty members who are responsible for introducing a new training for staff, they were able to feedback in two ways what's actually needed on the ground. Very important aspect as well was to share the positive practices, and a lot of innovation happened there in terms of how people shared practices, not only within the divisions or schools, but actually across the university as well. It was important to know what worked, what didn't work, and specific share points and exchange of files and photos and practices took place. It was also quite important to see how this transition obviously impacted students, and again, a very stressful time and huge transition for students alike. And important was to provide students with enough information, access to digital resources. The student couldn't access campuses, therefore the important thing was to provide them access to e-textbooks and other learning materials, shift as much learning into a synchronous model of delivery, so we could accommodate for different needs and different time zone lifestyles and other caring or different responsibilities the students had. So lots of, apart from those logistical things, a lot of help in terms of support, advice, psychological help and counseling, and social support in terms of creating as much of the collaborative space and buddy systems to enable students to actually feel like they belong to the community and they're part of the university, even if they find themselves away and at distance. Other practices were shared along, and also the important factor is that the technology was suddenly understood as not panacea for everything, but in these disruptive times definitely accelerated the need to reappraisal of what works and what needs further upskilling. I'm going to just rush a little bit, just noticing the time. So while there was a lot of positive practices happening, and the ones that I shared were just few to give you examples and insights, and I'm sure that you all have experiences from your own institutions or elsewhere that you were able to see how many probably similar practices emerged, and all, as we said, from the quality also of good professionalism and the idea that academics and administrative staff really wanted to make that transition as smooth for students as possible. For many institutions, despite the appetite for becoming digital universities, especially under the disruptive impact of COVID, is probably something still aspirational and perceived as incremental process rather than already fulfilled mission. And while the understanding is there to support both staff and students in acquiring wider digital competencies, the important thing is that COVID also highlighted, or at least makes us to stop and think about the potential unintended consequences of learning and teaching in a digital realms. Only now, perhaps, some of these ideas are surfacing, and they were evolved around personal data protection issues, cyber security issues that are not just characteristic to higher education, but all institutions who had to move their operations online. Lots of issues around ethical aspects, both of student attendance, also their performance monitoring practices. All those issues are really emerging. And this slide presents a list which by no means is exhaustive, is only indicative. But what we're really proposing is that those examples of conversations are already happening, giving us more and more snapshots each day on what we could perhaps call a dark side of online learning, and the ethicality of possible surveillance, both for staff and students, and the idea that perhaps some of this could be monetized and used not as per intended purpose of e-learning, And that idea of reuse of personal data. Professor Fortune was saying about the idea of sharing data and being very transparent with what's being known about that. And I think that this is one of the aspects that is coming to surface in terms of whether our students know what university systems know about them. So that idea of transparency and ethical approach, and also the path dependency of what are our decisions for the future, how we're going to teach, what we're going to teach, what's going to be influencing our choices, and whether the choices that our institutions make about what softwares or what providers we're using are the ones that will be there for us as a benchmark or as a one way of teaching. In that way, what we are all familiar with as a pedagogy-driven education might not be looking like in the future. Maybe the impacts of technology could potentially disrupt something that is very, very important. So concluding, while we're noticing that a lot of has changed, and obviously digital skills are needed, are sought by employers of today, and universities are a very important partner in making sure that those skills are provided and embedded in the curriculum. Moving to online under very stressful circumstances and very rapid decisions, and under a lot of challenges, makes us to think about all-inclusive interventions, and whether implementations of learning are really practically focused, because they should be practically focused and should be effective, based on inclusion strategies and interventions that are reaching to all individuals, including those from disadvantaged backgrounds and with lower level of skills. Also, while we are in this transition, and while we know still very little of a proper impact of COVID, there is that need to really think and take it seriously of what are potential long and short-term challenges, and especially those unintended consequences of digital learning and working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctors McQuaid and Webb. You've certainly provided us with some insightful commentary and research. I'm going to for us to think about. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you okay.
Okay,
Yep.
good. You've certainly provided us with some interesting and informative research. There certainly are a great many challenges. There's certainly many opportunities as we move forward in this shifting and changing environment that we currently live in.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.